Live. Ivory Coast breaks free. The West never expected this. History is unfolding right now. Ivory Coast has just broken free, and global powers are scrambling to respond. What you're about to see was never meant to happen. A live declaration of independence shaking the entire West. This moment is sending shockwaves across the globe. Ivory Coast just said an no to foreign control. As the cameras rolled, Ivory Coast took a stand the world didn't see coming, and now the balance of power is shifting. In a bold move caught on live broadcast, Ivory Coast made it clear Africa is reclaiming its future. Starting now, in a historic turn of events, Ivory Coast has taken bold steps toward full sovereignty, shaking the foundations of Western influence in Africa. This breaking development is being broadcasted live, and the world is watching closely as President Alassane Ouattara's government faces rising pressure from military forces and pro-independence leaders. Could this signal the beginning of a new African era? Is this the end of foreign control over African natural resources? What does this mean for France's role in West Africa? In this video, we cover the dramatic events unfolding in Ivory Coast, the reaction from the West and global powers, the rising influence of Pan-African leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré, what this revolution means for the future of African unity and independence. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed about Africa's biggest power shifts. 1. Could this signal the beginning of a new African era? The events unfolding in Ivory Coast, particularly the reported coup attempt in May 2025 and the decision to expel French troops, reflect a broader trend across West Africa where nations are asserting greater sovereignty and challenging historical ties with former colonial powers. This could indeed signal the beginning of a new African era, characterized by a push for self-determination, economic independence, and regional cooperation. Key indicators of this potential new era include rejection of foreign military presence. Ivory Coast's decision to withdraw French troops, announced by President Alassane Ouattara in December 2024, aligns with similar moves in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, and Chad. This reflects a growing sentiment that foreign military bases are incompatible with national sovereignty. Economic reorientation. Ivory Coast, as the world's largest cocoa producer, is navigating global trade challenges, such as U.S. tariffs, by seeking stronger ties with the European Union and potentially other partners like China or Russia. This suggests a shift toward diversifying economic partnerships beyond traditional Western allies. Regional integration. Initiatives like the planned 1,028 kilometers highway from Abidjan to Lagos, set to begin construction in 2026, aim to boost economic integration within the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Such projects could foster prosperity and counter the nationalism seen in recent coups, potentially strengthening regional unity. However, challenges remain. The reported coup attempt in Ivory Coast, though unconfirmed, suggests political instability that could hinder progress toward a cohesive new African era. Posts on X claim that President Ouattara, perceived as a French ally, fled during the coup attempt, pointing to internal divisions and external interference as persistent obstacles. Additionally, economic dependence on foreign markets, e.g., cocoa exports and the CFA franc, backed by France, limits full autonomy. A true new era would require sustained political stability, economic diversification, and Pan-African cooperation to overcome these hurdles. 2. Is this the end of foreign control over African natural resources? The push to expel foreign military forces and renegotiate economic relationships suggests a desire to reduce foreign control over African natural resources, but it is not yet the end. Ivory Coast's cocoa industry, which accounts for a significant portion of global supply, exemplifies both the potential and the limitations of this shift. Current control dynamics. Ivory Coast's economy heavily relies on cocoa exports, which are subject to global market prices and foreign trade policies, such as the 21% U.S. tariffs imposed in 2025. The country's agriculture minister indicated potential measures like export taxes to counter these tariffs, which could increase revenue but also raise consumer prices globally. This shows that while Ivory Coast can influence its resource trade, it lacks full control due to global market dependencies. Historical context. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 formalized European control over African resources, and post-independence arrangements like the CFA franc have perpetuated economic influence, particularly by France. The recent expulsion of French troops from Ivory Coast and other nations is a step toward challenging this legacy, but economic ties, such as French-backed currency systems, persist. New players. As France's influence wanes, countries like Russia and China are stepping in. For example, Russia has gained access to minerals in the Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger in exchange for security assistance. This suggests a shift in foreign influence rather than its complete end, as African nations trade one set of partners for another. Complete control over natural resources would require African nations to develop local processing industries, e.g., turning cocoa beans into chocolate, as Monchoco aims to do, and reduce reliance on foreign-backed currencies. While the current trajectory points toward greater agency, foreign control is far from over. 3. What does this mean for France's role in West Africa? France's role in West Africa is undergoing a significant transformation, marked by a decline in military and political influence, but continued economic ties. The withdrawal of French troops from Ivory Coast, announced in December 2024, is part of a broader trend across the Sahel and West Africa, signaling the end of the Francofrique era of overt influence. Military withdrawal. Ivory Coast's decision to expel 600 French troops from the 43rd Baima Marine Infantry Battalion in Abidjan follows similar moves by Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, and Chad. This reflects growing anti-French sentiment and a demand for sovereignty, with leaders like Senegal's Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Chad's Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno explicitly criticizing French presence as incompatible with national interests. Political backlash. French President Emmanuel Macron's comments implying African nations were ungrateful for France's military support have strained relations, particularly with Chad and Senegal. In Ivory Coast, President Ouattara's decision to cut military ties may be politically motivated to align with public sentiment ahead of the 2025 elections. Despite his historically close ties to France, economic influence persists. Despite military withdrawals, France retains economic leverage through the CFA franc, which Ivory Coast and other West African nations continue to use. This currency, backed by France, provides stability but limits monetary autonomy. Additionally, Ivory Coast remains a strategic ally for France, with joint efforts like the Counterterrorism Academy in Abidjan. Geopolitical shifts. The vacuum left by France is being filled by Russia and China. Russia's Wagner Group has secured mineral contracts in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, while China's trade dominance is growing. This suggests France's role is shifting from direct control to a more competitive, less dominant position. France is likely to maintain some influence through economic and diplomatic channels, but its military and political dominance in West Africa is significantly diminished, reflecting a broader rejection of neocolonial frameworks. 4. The dramatic events unfolding in Ivory Coast. The dramatic events in Ivory Coast center on the reported coup attempt in May 2025 and the earlier decision to expel French troops, both of which have heightened political tensions and drawn global attention. While the coup remains unconfirmed, it underscores the fragility of Ivory Coast's political landscape despite its economic strength. Coup attempt. Posts on X claim a military takeover occurred on May 20, 2025, with President Ouattara fleeing and internet access disrupted. Allegations point to French interference, given Ouattara's perceived alignment with France. However, these claims lack corroboration from major news outlets, suggesting they may be speculative or exaggerated. The coup attempt, if true, reflects discontent with Ouattara's leadership and foreign influence, particularly France's troop withdrawal. In December 2024, Ouattara announced the withdrawal of French troops starting in January 2025, transferring the Port Bouet base to Ivorian forces. This move, part of a broader regional trend, was framed as a step towards strengthening national military capacity. Political context. The barring of Tidjane Thiam, a prominent opposition leader from the 2025 presidential race, has fueled disillusionment with Ivory Coast's democratic process. Thiam's exclusion, combined with Ouattara's potential bid for a fourth term, has deepened public frustration, particularly among youth sympathetic to anti-establishment rhetoric seen in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Economic backdrop. Ivory Coast's economy, driven by cocoa, has recovered well from past civil wars, but recent U.S. tariffs and global market pressures highlight vulnerabilities. The coup attempt, if verified, could disrupt this economic stability, which is critical for the CFA franc bloc and ECOWAS. These events, whether confirmed or not, highlight Ivory Coast's pivotal role in West Africa and the tension between sovereignty and external influence. 5. The reaction from the West and global powers. The West and global powers have reacted with concern to Ivory Coast's developments, particularly the troop withdrawal and the reported coup attempt, as they signal a broader shift in African geopolitics. Western response. France has faced diplomatic backlash for Macron's comments, which alienated allies like Chad and Senegal. The U.S., while imposing tariffs on Ivory Coast's cocoa, has paused broader tariffs for 90 days, indicating a cautious approach to African markets amid fears of economic disruption. The US and Germany have also shown willingness to engage with military regimes in the Sahel, unlike France, suggesting a pragmatic shift to maintain influence. Russia and China. Russia is capitalizing on anti-French sentiment, offering security assistance in exchange for mineral access in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. China's growing trade dominance, surpassing the U.S., positions it as a key economic partner for African nations seeking alternatives to Western markets, African Union and ECOWAS. The African Union's role has declined in recent years, with ECOWAS struggling to maintain unity amid coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Ivory Coast's actions could either strengthen ECOWAS through economic projects like the Abidjan-Lagos Highway or further strain if political instability persists. Public sentiment. Posts on X reflect a narrative of Western interference, particularly blaming France for the Ivory Coast coup attempt, though these claims are unverified. This suggests a polarized perception of Western intentions. With growing support for non-Western partners, the West is recalibrating its approach to Africa, balancing economic interests with the need to counter Russia and China's growing influence, while African nations leverage these rivalries to assert sovereignty. 6. The rising influence of Pan-African leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's military leader since the 2022 coup, has become a symbol of Pan-Africanism and anti-colonial resistance, influencing leaders and youth across West Africa. His rising prominence reflects a broader movement toward asserting African sovereignty. Traoré's influence. Traoré's leadership emphasizes nationalizing resources, e.g., Burkina Faso's gold reserves, and rejecting Western, particularly French, influence. Posts on X suggest his stance inspires other African leaders, with some claiming he could catalyze Africa's rise as a superpower within 15 years. Regional impact. Traoré's formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, ASS, with Mali and Niger, following their expulsion of French troops, has strengthened regional counterterrorism efforts and anti-French sentiment. Ivory Coast and Senegal may consider joining this alliance, especially if anti-French sentiment grows. Youth appeal. Traoré's anti-establishment rhetoric resonates with disenchanted youth in Ivory Coast, where frustration with leaders like Ouattara mirrors sentiments in coup-hit nations. His focus on self-reliance and resource control aligns with Pan-African ideals of economic independence. Challenges. Traoré's military regime faces criticism for authoritarianism and reliance on Russian mercenaries, which complicates his Pan-African credentials. Additionally, his influence may exacerbate ECOWAS divisions. As the ASS operates outside its framework, Traoré's rise signals a shift toward leaders who prioritize sovereignty and resource control, but his model's sustainability depends on balancing security, governance, and regional cooperation. 7. What this revolution means for the future of African unity and independence. The revolution in Ivory Coast, whether referring to the troop withdrawal or the reported coup attempt, has profound implications for African unity and independence, reflecting both opportunities and risks. Opportunities for unity. Economic integration. The Abidjan-Lagos Highway project could enhance ECOWAS cohesion, fostering trade and prosperity among coastal nations, shared sovereignty goals. The expulsion of French troops across West Africa aligns with Pan-African ideals of self-determination, potentially uniting nations around common goals. Cultural movements. Initiatives like the Miss Ivory Coast pageant's natural hair rule reflect a broader embrace of African identity, which could strengthen cultural unity. Risks to unity. Political instability. The unconfirmed coup attempt in Ivory Coast and similar coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger threaten regional stability and ECOWAS unity. External influence. While France's role diminishes, Russia and China's growing presence risks. Replacing one form of foreign influence with another, complicating true independence. Economic constraints. The CFA franc and global market dependencies limit economic independence, hindering unified efforts to control resources. Path to independence. Achieving true independence requires African nations to invest in local industries, reform monetary systems, and strengthen regional bodies like ECOWAS and the African Union. Leaders like Traoré may inspire this shift, but their reliance on external partners like Russia could undermine long-term autonomy. The revolution in Ivory Coast and similar movements across West Africa could pave the way for greater unity and independence if political stability and economic self-reliance are prioritized. However, fragmentation and new forms of foreign influence pose significant challenges. Conclusion. The events in Ivory Coast, from the expulsion of French troops to the reported coup attempt, reflect a broader regional push for sovereignty and a challenge to neo-colonial structures. While these developments could herald a new African era of unity and independence, significant hurdles remain, including political instability, economic dependencies, and new forms of foreign influence. France's role in West Africa is diminishing, but its economic ties and the rise of Russia and China complicate the path to true independence. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré inspire Pan-African ideals, but their methods and alliances raise questions about sustainability. For Ivory Coast and West Africa to achieve lasting unity and independence, they must prioritize political stability, economic diversification, and regional cooperation while navigating global power dynamics.